Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Quebec, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Quebec, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Julien Moreau, and this happened when I was 32. During the winter, I returned to my hometown near Lac Noir, a place most maps barely bother to name. I came back for practical reasons. My mother's failing health, the slow collapse of our family home. But deep down, I think I came back because I never stopped feeling watched there. Lac Noir sits beyond a stretch of forest where the trees grow too close together, their branches locking like fingers. As kids, we were warned not to go near the lake after sunset. Adults said it was because of thin ice, but the fear in their voices told another story. I took a temporary job maintaining hydro lines, working long, silent days with my childhood friend Etienne, who feared the lake more than anyone I knew. His goal was simple: finish the season and leave Quebec forever. Mine was less clear. Every night, from my bedroom window, I saw faint lights flickering beneath the frozen surface of the lake, slow, deliberate, and impossible to explain. At first, I told myself the lights were reflections, passing trucks on distant roads, maybe my imagination filling in old childhood fears. But Etienne saw them too. One night, while we checked a line near the tree edge, he grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt and whispered my name like a warning. His face had gone pale, eyes fixed on the lake. "They're back," he said. He didn't explain what they were, only that his father used to drink himself unconscious every winter after seeing the same lights decades ago. The next morning, we found something strange near the shoreline, a line of melted snow cutting cleanly through the ice, as if heat had risen from below in a perfect curve. No footprints. No cracks. Just smooth, wet ice steaming in the cold air. Etienne wanted to report it. I wanted to leave it alone. That night, the lights grew brighter, closer to the surface, pulsing slowly like something breathing beneath the lake, patiently waiting for the ice to thin. The third night was when the lake began to answer us. Around midnight, a low humming vibrated through the house, subtle enough that I first mistook it for wind pushing against the walls. But the sound didn't fade. It deepened, settling into my chest like pressure. I stepped outside, boots crunching softly in the snow, and saw the lights moving beneath the ice in a slow circular pattern. Not random, organized, intentional. Etienne called me moments later, his voice shaking. He confessed something he had never told anyone. Years ago, a local fisherman vanished after claiming he heard voices calling his name from under the lake. The police blamed alcohol and thin ice, but Etienne's father had seen the lights that same night. As we spoke, the humming grew louder, and cracks spidered across the ice, stopping just short of the shore, as if whatever was beneath knew exactly how far it was allowed to come. The following day, Etienne didn't show up for work. His truck sat abandoned near the access road to Lac Noir, engine cold, driver's door wide open. Panic clawed at me as I followed a single set of footprints leading toward the lake, then stopping abruptly, as if he had simply vanished. No struggle, no signs of slipping, just empty snow. Against every instinct, I stepped onto the ice. The humming returned instantly, stronger now, resonating through my bones. Beneath my feet, the lights surged upward, illuminating shadowy shapes that shifted just beyond clarity. I heard my name then, not shouted, but spoken gently in Etienne's voice. I backed away, heart racing, when the ice directly ahead thinned to transparency for a split second. Below it was not water, but something darker, vast, layered, and watching. I ran, the sound of cracking ice chasing me all the way back to shore, knowing with sick certainty that Etienne had never truly been alone out there. After Etienne disappeared, the town closed ranks the way small towns always do, quietly and without questions. The police filed a missing persons report, nodded sympathetically, and warned me not to spread rumors. An older officer pulled me aside and told me Etienne probably walked out onto unsafe ice. His tone rehearsed, almost bored. But that night, his father came to my house drunk and shaking, gripping my coat like a lifeline. He begged me to leave Lac Noir before the lake finished what it started. He told me the truth then. Decades ago, workers drilling beneath the lake for geological surveys hit something hollow that should not have been there. After that, the lights began appearing every winter. People vanished slowly, one every few years, just often enough to be forgotten. The lake didn't take everyone. It chose. As if sensing my understanding, the humming began again, louder than ever, rattling windows and drawing me outside despite my fear. I don't remember deciding to go back to the lake, only realizing I was already walking toward it, drawn by a pull that felt older than thought. The ice groaned under my weight, but it didn't crack. Instead, the lights parted beneath me, forming a wide circle directly below my feet. The surface thinned again, turning glass clear, and I saw what waited beneath Lac Noir. Not creatures, not machines, but something vast and layered, like a living cavern filled with slow-moving light. Voices echoed upward, dozens overlapping, familiar and broken. Etienne's face surfaced among them, calm and expressionless, as if suspended in sleep. He told me it didn't hurt anymore, that the lake needed witnesses, not just victims. When the ice finally fractured, it stopped inches from my boots, a deliberate mercy. I ran back screaming, knowing the truth, that the lake let some people go, not out of kindness, but to ensure the story is carried forward. By morning, the town had changed its posture toward me. Neighbors who once nodded now looked away. Conversation stopped when I entered shops. A notice appeared on the community board announcing the lake road would be closed for safety reasons, effective immediately. It felt less like protection and more like containment. I packed my bags, intent on leaving before nightfall. But the humming followed me. Soft at first, then insistent, vibrating through the floorboards as if the house itself were listening. Etienne's mother came by unannounced, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She asked me, quietly, if he had said goodbye. When I told her what I'd seen beneath the ice, she didn't cry. She only nodded, as if a long-held suspicion had finally been confirmed. "It keeps them," she said, "and it keeps us quiet." That evening, the lights flared brighter than ever, reflecting off my windows like a signal meant only for me. I left before midnight, driving fast down the narrow road that cut through the forest. In my rearview mirror, I saw the tree line glow faintly blue, the light pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Miles later, the humming finally faded, replaced by an unbearable silence. I thought I had escaped, until weeks passed and I began dreaming of Lac Noir every night. In those dreams, the ice was gone, The lake opened wide, revealing endless layers of light and shadow beneath. Voices called me by name, not pleading, not threatening, inviting. I started sketching the patterns I'd seen under the ice without realizing it, filling notebooks with shapes that felt uncomfortably familiar. Even now, far from Quebec, I sometimes wake to a low vibration beneath my bed, like something deep underground has remembered me. I understand the truth at last. Lac Noir doesn't just take people, it marks them. And one winter soon, I know I'll feel the pull again, strong enough that I won't be able to turn away. I tried to move on. I took a job in another province, changed my routine, stopped talking about Quebec altogether. But the lake followed me in quieter ways. Streetlights would flicker as I passed beneath them, dimming into the same slow pulse I had seen under the ice. Electronics failed around me without reason. Once, in a public pool, I froze mid-step when I saw lights shimmering beneath the surface. Just reflections, they said. But my body reacted before my mind could. I contacted a university geology department anonymously, describing Lac Noir and the hollow space beneath it. Weeks later, I received a short reply advising me not to pursue naturally unstable formations and never to return to the site. The message felt less academic and more like a warning. That night, I dreamed of Etienne again. This time, his expression wasn't peaceful. He looked afraid, and for the first time, he begged me not to come back. Because once the lake calls you twice, it never lets you leave again. I'm recording this now because winter is approaching again, and the humming has returned. Low, steady, coming from beneath my apartment floor, despite being hundreds of miles from Lac Noir. Last night, my phone lit up on its own, displaying coordinates I recognized instantly. The lake's shoreline, the exact spot where the ice had thinned beneath my boots. I finally understand why some people are spared. The lake doesn't just feed, it studies. It releases those who can remember clearly enough to return willingly. I don't know what waits beneath Lac Noir, and I don't think it wants to be understood. It wants to be reached. If I disappear, they'll say I went back chasing closure or grief. They'll say I stepped onto unsafe ice. That's what they always say. But if you ever see lights moving beneath a frozen lake in a place where no light should exist, don't watch for too long. Because once it notices you noticing it, the story has already chosen its ending. My name is Marc-André Pelletier, and this happened when I was 27. During the winter, I worked night deliveries along the back roads near Saint-Éloi, a rural Quebec town surrounded by endless fields and black forest. I took the job because it paid well and because night driving suited me. I liked the silence, the sense of being alone with my thoughts. What no one warned me about was Route 381, a narrow stretch of road locals avoided after dark. The first time I drove it, snow fell so heavily it erased the horizon. That was when I heard the whistling. It cut cleanly through the hum of my engine. Slow, deliberate, almost playful. I assumed it was wind slipping through a crack in the window until I rolled it down and the sound stopped instantly. When I rolled it back up, the whistling resumed. Closer now, as if coming from just outside the truck. Every delivery after that night, the sound returned. Always on the same stretch of road, I asked around about Route 381, pretending curiosity. Most people laughed it off, but their eyes gave them away. An older gas station attendant finally told me the truth in a low voice. Years ago, a school bus slid off that road during a storm. Not everyone was found. Since then, drivers reported hearing whistling, always 3 notes, repeated slowly. He warned me never to stop if I heard it. "It wants you to slow down," he said, "so it can catch up." That night, the whistling began earlier than usual. My headlights flickered, and the road ahead seemed to stretch unnaturally long, refusing to end. Then I saw it in the snowbank. A figure standing perfectly still, arm raised like someone hitchhiking. I told myself it was a scarecrow or a trick of drifting snow. But when I passed it, the whistling came from directly behind me, right where my back seat should have been. I slammed on the accelerator, praying the truck's tires would grip the snow. But the road seemed endless, twisting unnaturally as if it wanted to keep me trapped. The whistling didn't fade. It followed my every turn, echoing inside the cabin like 1,000 tiny mouths. My heart thumped so hard I could barely focus on the road. Then I saw it again, closer this time, standing in the center line of the road. Its face was hidden beneath a tattered hood, but its presence radiated a cold hunger that turned my stomach. I tried to swerve, but the truck jerked violently, snow spraying everywhere. The whistling changed, faster, taunting, almost like laughter. I felt a tap on my shoulder, icy cold, though no one was there. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles bled. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town, where the streetlights finally cut through the storm. Even then, the whistling lingered in my ears, haunting me long after the road had vanished behind me. The next day, I tried to rationalize everything. Exhaustion, hallucinations. Winter storms can do strange things to the mind. But the locals' warnings gnawed at me. I returned home early that evening, determined to avoid Route 381 entirely. My parents scolded me for my nerves, but deep down, I couldn't shake the fear of what had followed me. That night, I fell asleep in my apartment and woke to faint whistling outside my window. 3 notes, slow and deliberate, just like the gas station attendant said. My blood ran cold. I peeked outside, expecting to see a prankster, but there was only snow falling in silence. I realized then that it wasn't bound to the road. It had learned my name, my schedule, my fear. From then on, every delivery, every night drive, every quiet moment in my apartment carried that same haunting sound. The whistling was patient. It didn't rush. And it never stopped hunting. Weeks passed, and I couldn't avoid the road forever. The company insisted I complete night deliveries, and avoiding Route 381 meant losing my job. One evening, I tried to take a different path, but the storm redirected me back to the same stretch. Snow fell in heavy sheets, and the headlights barely cut through the night. That familiar 3-note whistle started softly, almost teasing me. My chest tightened as I realized it was coming from all around, bouncing off the trees, the snowbanks, even the sky itself. Halfway down the road, my radio sparked and cracked with static. Then a voice whispered my name. I froze, the truck sliding slightly on ice. My mind screamed for logic, but there was none. Then the figure appeared in the center of the road again, closer than before. The snow around it seemed darker, absorbing the headlights. My instincts screamed to swerve, but a paralyzing force held me in place. Whatever this was, it wanted me to see it, and it had all the time in the world. The figure didn't move toward me. It just watched, silent, its presence pressing against my chest. Then the whistling stopped. Absolute silence fell, so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat echoing through the cabin. I finally forced my legs to move, pressing the accelerator to its limit, tires squealing on ice. Behind me, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping along the edges of the road like smoke, keeping pace with the truck. I reached the first lit part of town and slammed the brakes, panting, shaking uncontrollably. When I looked back, there was nothing. No figure, no darkness, just snow-covered road that stretched endlessly into the woods. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt like the whistling returning. I realized it had marked me the same way it marked every driver who dared the road. I had survived, but only because I obeyed its unspoken rule. Never stop, never hesitate, never look back. And yet deep in my chest, I knew the next storm would call me again. The following week, I tried to confide in my closest friend Olivier about the road. I expected skepticism, but his reaction chilled me more than the winter wind ever could. He grew pale and whispered, "I've seen it too, but you don't talk about it." He told me about his cousin who disappeared on Route 381 10 years prior. Locals whispered that the whistling wasn't just a warning. It was a lure, a way to draw people closer to the shadows hiding in the trees. Olivier said he never drove that road after dark again. I didn't listen. Pride and necessity pushed me back. That night, the storm arrived faster than predicted, turning familiar stretches of road into a twisting maze. The whistling started almost immediately, closer than I'd ever heard before. It slithered around the cab, coming from inside and outside at once. I realized with sickening clarity that it wasn't bound by distance or reality. It existed wherever I went. My headlights caught movement in the tree line, just at the edge of vision. Another figure, waiting, patient, almost smiling. By midnight, I had lost all sense of distance and direction. The road twisted in impossible ways, longer and narrower than it should have been. The whistling intensified, echoing as though the forest itself were alive, each note perfectly timed with my heartbeat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, nothing but snow and shadows. But I felt the presence, patient, circling, learning my every move. When I rounded a bend, I saw footprints in the snow ahead of me, freshly made, leading directly into the trees. They were too large, elongated, unnatural, and vanished halfway into darkness. I considered stopping, but something inside me screamed that halting would be fatal. The whistling reached a crescendo, vibrating through the truck's metal frame. Then, silence. Absolute suffocating silence. My breath visible in the cold air, I drove blindly, adrenaline burning in my veins. Eventually, lights appeared in the distance, the edge of town. The road straightened, the forest receded. But deep down, I knew the whistling hadn't ended. It never would. It was patient, and I was only temporarily free. The following morning, I called the company and begged for a reassignment. They reluctantly agreed, but the relief was temporary. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. The slow, deliberate three-note whistle echoing in my mind. I tried to ignore it, but dreams of the road invaded every night. I would be driving, the snow falling thick, when the figure would appear in my path, silent, hooded, and impossibly patient. Each dream ended the same way, the forest closing in, the whistling echoing louder than my own screams. I visited Olivier, hoping for solace, but he only shook his head. "You can't outrun it," he said. "It doesn't leave anyone alone. It waits for a storm, a moment when you're tired, distracted, or vulnerable. That's when it comes closest." His words planted a seed of dread I could not uproot. I realized that no matter where I went, the road, the snow, and the whistling were now a permanent part of me. Months later, I attempted a final drive through Route 381, determined to confront whatever haunted me. The storm came as predicted, thicker than any before. The whistling started immediately, echoing from the tree line, inside the truck, and from nowhere all at once. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, eyes scanning for the figure I now dreaded but somehow needed to see. Then, in the snow-covered center of the road, the figure emerged fully. Tall, faceless beneath a tattered hood, eyes faintly glowing in a way that felt impossibly ancient. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The whistling slowed, deliberate, hypnotic. For a moment, I felt understood, almost welcomed. Then the road straightened abruptly. The figure vanished, and the storm ended as suddenly as it had begun. I drove into town, silent and trembling. I understand now that Route 381 doesn't just claim its victims, it marks them. The whistling doesn't stop, doesn't fade. It waits, always, for the next storm, the next driver, the next heartbeat it can follow into the night. My name is Isabelle Fournier, and this happened when I was 29 during a hiking trip in the dense forests near Mont-Tremblant, Quebec. I had always loved solitude and the way the snow muffled every sound, turning the woods into a cathedral of silence. My plan was simple. Spend a weekend alone in a rented cabin, write in my journal, and escape the city's chaos. What I didn't expect was how the forest itself would resist me. The cabin was charming at first. Weathered logs, a stone chimney, and smoke curling from the stove. But the first night brought unease. I woke to the sound of footsteps circling the cabin, light but deliberate. I peeked through the frost on the window. Nothing. Only snow falling softly. I shrugged it off as wildlife, yet the feeling of being watched lingered. Then I noticed something impossible. The trees outside had shifted, their position slightly different from when I first arrived, almost like the forest itself was reshaping to watch me. By the second night, the cabin had begun to feel alive. Doors that I knew were locked creaked open, and shadows moved where there should have been none. I tried to rationalize it as exhaustion or imagination, but my journal, left on the table, had entries I didn't remember writing. Strange symbols, lines that curved unnaturally, almost breathing across the page. Late that evening, I ventured outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of a rational explanation. The snow under my boots felt impossibly soft, almost yielding, and the forest seemed to close behind me with every step. In the distance, I saw another cabin, identical to mine, though I had been told mine was the only one in this clearing. As I approached, the air grew colder, denser. The door opened slowly, creaking in a way that sounded like a warning. A faint light flickered inside, warm and inviting, yet my instincts screamed to stay away. Something about that second cabin whispered that it wasn't meant for anyone to enter. I stepped back from the glowing cabin, my breath visible in the freezing night air. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. The trees around me shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, like they were breathing, inching closer with each heartbeat. The snow beneath my boots became uneven, forming small ridges as if guiding me toward the cabin. I realized then that the forest itself was alive, not in the way birds or animals are alive, but in a deliberate, sentient way. When I finally turned to retreat to my original cabin, it was gone. In its place was nothing but snow and shadowed trees, twisted unnaturally, dense and dark. Panic clawed at me as I searched, calling out my own name into the frozen silence. A faint glow flickered in the distance again, drawing me forward despite my terror. It wasn't just a cabin. It was a lure, a trap, a place that existed to ensnare, and I had walked directly into its web. I approached the glowing cabin again, hands trembling, heart hammering in my chest. The snow whispered under my boots, almost like voices guiding me forward. The door opened slowly on its own, revealing a warm interior filled with shadows that shifted like smoke. The air smelled faintly metallic, sweet and sharp at the same time. Inside, furniture arranged exactly as in my original cabin, but subtly wrong, angles off, chairs slightly too tall, stove warped in impossible curves. Then I saw it. My journal, open on a table I didn't recognize. Pages filled with the same strange symbols I'd seen the night before, now forming a spiral that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. A low hum vibrated through the cabin, resonating inside my chest. I wanted to leave, but the cabin seemed to close in, walls stretching and breathing. I realized then that the cabin wasn't a building. It was a living entity, waiting for me to make a choice. Leave and risk getting lost forever, or step fully inside and never be seen again. I backed away from the table, heart racing, unable to tear my eyes from the glowing symbols. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my bones like a warning. I thought about running, but the door had vanished, replaced by a wall of shifting shadows. My instincts screamed that the cabin itself was testing me, measuring my fear, my hesitation. Each step I took caused the floorboards to ripple, almost like water, and the walls leaned inward as if the cabin was breathing, alive and aware of my presence. Then I noticed a figure in the corner, a silhouette of a man, faceless, wearing a hood similar to the figures described in local legends. He didn't move, didn't speak. Yet I felt his awareness pressing down on me, weighing on my thoughts. My mind screamed, but my body was frozen. It was then I understood. The cabin didn't just lure you in. It waited, studied, and sometimes it let you leave, so it could follow. I forced my legs to move backward, fumbling for anything resembling a door or window. The shadows shifted, almost playfully, forming shapes that mimicked my every motion. I realized then that the cabin wanted to confuse me, trap me not through force, but through manipulation. The hum intensified, forming voices that whispered my name softly but insistently. I stumbled across the warped floor, almost losing my balance, as the faceless figure shifted closer, its presence pressing in like ice against my skin. Finally, my hands found the edge of a warped window. I yanked it open, cold winter air biting my face. The cabin groaned, almost protesting, but the opening held. I clambered through, landing in the snow outside. Behind me, the cabin had already shifted, looking smaller, more distant, as though it were resetting, waiting for its next visitor. I ran blindly into the forest, snow cutting my cheeks, never glancing back. Though the glow from the cabin lingered in my vision like a warning I would never forget. By the time I emerged deeper into the forest, the snow had begun falling heavier, masking my tracks. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. The glow from the cabin still lingered in my vision, faint yet persistent, as if it had followed me outside. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but the shifting shadows between the trees told a different story. Something, or someone, was moving just beyond my sight, keeping pace without sound. Eventually, I stumbled upon a trail I recognized, one leading to the main road. Relief should have washed over me, but instead, my heart thudded in panic. I realized the forest wasn't done. The path curved in ways it shouldn't, trees bending subtly to block my view, and every time I thought I reached a clearing, I found another wall of shadows. The cabin had not let me go entirely. It was patient, biding its time. And somewhere deep in the snow and dark, I felt it watching, waiting for the next moment of weakness. Hours, or maybe minutes later, I finally reached the main road. The snow had settled into a thick silence, masking any sound of pursuit. Yet I felt it behind me, patient and relentless. I tried calling for help, but my voice sounded strange, swallowed by the oppressive forest. When I glanced back, the glowing cabin appeared briefly between the trees, closer than it should have been, then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I realized then that distance meant nothing to it. I flagged down a passing vehicle, trembling so violently I could barely speak. The driver stared at me as if I were a ghost, asking if I had seen a cabin in the forest. I shook my head, unable to explain the truth without sounding insane. That night, even in the safety of town, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were haunted by warped walls, glowing journals, and shifting shadows. I understood now that the vanishing cabin didn't just trap you physically. It trapped your mind, leaving marks that never fade. Weeks passed, but the memory of the cabin refused to fade. Even in town, I felt its presence pressing at the edges of my mind. Shadows in alleyways, faint flickers of light in my peripheral vision, and the whispers of shifting walls haunted me constantly. I tried to tell friends, but the words caught in my throat. How could anyone believe a cabin that moved and watched, that shifted reality itself? Even writing about it in my journal felt futile. The symbols kept appearing, scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. One night, I returned to the forest, hoping for closure. The snow was heavier, the trees more oppressive, yet I walked forward. There, deep among the pines, the faint glow appeared again. My heart sank as I realized it wasn't welcoming me. It was waiting, patient, expectant. The cabin didn't want closure. It wanted me to remember, to carry its memory forward so it could live in me and through me. I turned and fled, but the forest already remembered my footsteps, shaping paths I had never taken. Even now, years later, I feel the cabin in my dreams. The glow, the warped interior, the spiral symbols. They follow me. I sometimes wake in the middle of the night to find snow where there should be none, or shadows bending strangely across my room. I know the cabin doesn't exist in the physical world anymore, yet it exists in a way that defies explanation, marking its presence inside my mind, waiting for the day I return to the forest. I've learned to respect the forest and the cabin, to never seek it out intentionally. But deep down, I know it's patient. It waits for those who underestimate it, who wander too far, or who think the forest is only trees and snow. The vanishing cabin is alive, and it knows how to find you. It doesn't need doors, walls, or windows. Only fear, curiosity, and the willingness to walk a little too far. And for anyone who enters Mont Tremblant's depths alone, it will always be waiting, unseen, but ever present. My name is Lucy Tremblay, and this happened when I was 24, working as a freelance photographer. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, capturing the decay and silence of structures forgotten by time. My latest obsession was the Charlevoix Asylum, a massive psychiatric institution abandoned for decades, perched on a cliff overlooking the St. Lawrence River. Locals avoided it, whispering stories of experiments, disappearances, and echoes of the past that refused to die. The first time I entered, the air was thick with dust and rot. Broken furniture lay scattered across the halls, and shattered glass reflected dim sunlight filtering through boarded windows. But the deeper I went, the heavier the atmosphere became. I began hearing faint whispers echoing down empty corridors. At first, I thought it was the wind or the building settling. But the whispers grew more coherent, forming fragmented words, distant laughter, and cries of despair. I realized I was not alone. And the asylum remembered every footstep I took, as though it had been waiting for me. By nightfall, the asylum transformed entirely. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the halls, and the air grew colder, damp and heavy, pressing against my lungs. My flashlight flickered repeatedly, casting distorted shapes along peeling walls and graffiti-stained tiles. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like footsteps following me, though I was alone, or so I thought. I entered what had once been the patient treatment wing. Rows of rusted gurneys lined the floor. On one, a figure appeared, hunched and motionless, pale in the faint light. I froze, heart pounding, whispering to myself that it was a mannequin or a trick of the shadows. But when I blinked, it had shifted slightly, closer than before. A low, guttural hum filled the room, vibrating through my chest. The air smelled metallic and sickly sweet, like old blood mixed with decay. I realized that this place didn't just hold the memories of the past, it held them physically, alive, and it was aware of my presence. I stumbled backward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel its awareness pressing down on me. The whispers escalated into fragmented phrases. Leave. Stay. We're watching. You'll never leave. The words echoed off the walls, overlapping in a horrifying cacophony. I tried to rationalize it as my imagination, but deep in my chest, a primal fear told me otherwise. As I turned to escape, the hallway stretched impossibly long, the doors I had passed earlier vanishing into shadows. My heart raced, my breath fogging in the frigid air, and I realized the asylum wasn't just abandoned, it was alive. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, like a heartbeat, and the shadows moved independently, stretching toward me. Every creak of the floorboards matched my own heartbeat. Somewhere in the darkness, the figure shifted again, closer, silent yet oppressive. I had entered a place that remembered every fear, every scream, and now it was sharing its history with me in ways I could barely comprehend. I reached a staircase leading downward, compelled by a mixture of curiosity and terror. The air grew heavier, damp and pungent, carrying the stench of mold and rust. Each step groaned beneath my weight, echoing into an endless void below. At the base, the basement opened into a massive chamber, filled with overturned furniture, shattered glass, and rusted medical equipment. The whispers intensified, forming coherent words this time. We are here, always watching. You cannot leave. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into multiple figures, faceless, motionless, yet undeniably alive in the way the asylum itself was alive. The walls seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding, reshaping the chamber around me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was as if the building had swallowed my voice. I realized in terror that leaving would not be enough. The asylum would follow, imprinting itself into my mind, marking me as part of its history. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat was now observed, cataloged, and remembered by a place that should have remained forgotten. I tried to move toward what I thought was the exit. But the basement stretched on endlessly, corridors twisting like a labyrinth. Every time I reached what I believed was the end, another hallway opened before me, lined with broken doors and the faint glow of shadows beyond. The whispering grew louder, almost angry now, like a warning or a demand. My flashlight flickered violently, plunging me into near darkness, and I felt cold fingers brush across my shoulders, though no one was there. Panic surged through me, but curiosity kept me moving forward. I noticed old patient records scattered across the floor, pages yellowed and curling, with names scratched out violently. One page seemed fresh, ink dark and wet, as if someone, or something, had written it just moments before. My name stared back at me, My chest tightened as I realized the asylum wasn't just remembering the past, it was marking me, claiming me as part of its history. Every hallway, every shadow, every whisper confirmed that I could not leave unmarked. I stumbled into what looked like a treatment room, walls peeling and stained, metal gurneys rusted and tipped over. The air vibrated with whispers, forming a chorus of names and fragmented sentences. I could see faint outlines of faceless figures hovering near the ceiling, almost floating, their presence heavy and suffocating. My mind raced. I wanted to leave, but the room seemed to stretch endlessly, corners receding into darkness that pulsed and breathed like living flesh. Then I saw it, a shadow emerging from the far corner, humanoid yet distorted, as if made of smoke and despair. It raised an arm slowly, pointing toward me, and I felt an icy wave of dread wash over my body. I tried to speak, to apologize, to plead, but no sound came out. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the room resisted, walls bending subtly, narrowing my path. I understood then the truth. The asylum didn't just trap people physically, it trapped their minds, leaving scars that no light or time could ever erase. I ran blindly through the labyrinthine corridors, my flashlight barely cutting through the thick shadows. The whispers escalated into a deafening chorus, overlapping into a maddening cacophony. Faces, distorted, faceless, or screaming, flickered along the walls as though the asylum itself projected its memories onto the crumbling surfaces. Every turn I took led me deeper, further from any exit I had originally seen. Panic clawed at me, yet some part of me kept moving forward, driven by a need to survive and to understand what haunted this place. At one point, I stumbled into the main atrium. Broken windows allowed the moonlight to spill across the shattered tiles, illuminating a mass of shadows writhing along the walls like living ink. The air was thick, vibrating with a low hum that pressed into my chest. I realized with horror that the building itself was alive, feeding on fear and observing every beat of my heart. Every step I had taken, every breath I drew, was catalogued. And it wanted me to know I was no longer just a visitor. I had become part of its story. Desperate, I tried to retrace my steps. But the corridors twisted impossibly, hallways lengthening or disappearing as if the asylum itself were reshaping to trap me. Doors I remembered now led to walls, and windows reflected rooms I had never seen. The whispers turned into screaming, voices overlapping and layering, each one calling my name, accusing me, laughing at me. My body ached from exhaustion, yet I couldn't stop. The building's presence pressed on me, urging me to keep moving, to obey its unseen rules. Suddenly, I found a small staircase descending into darkness that I hadn't noticed before. Against my better judgment, I took it, hoping it might lead to an exit. The steps creaked under my weight, echoing through a cavernous space below. The shadows coalesced at the bottom, forming figures I could barely comprehend. Tall, distorted, faceless, yet unmistakably alive. They seemed to reach toward me, not violently, but expectantly, as if testing my resolve. I realized in that moment that leaving wouldn't just be about escaping the asylum. It would be about surviving its judgment and enduring the imprint it left on my mind. I reached the bottom of the staircase, heart hammering in my chest, the air thick with the stench of decay, and something far worse. Something alive. The basement stretched out like a cathedral of shadows, with broken gurneys, rusted instruments, and walls that seemed to breathe. The faceless figures drifted closer, not attacking, but observing, their presence suffocating. My mind raced as the whispers became coherent. You cannot leave. You belong forever. I turned to run, but the floor shifted beneath my feet, subtly tilting and warping, guiding me toward a corner of the basement I hadn't noticed before. A faint light glowed there, and I could see a doorway, barely perceptible, leading upward. I hesitated, knowing the asylum had already marked me, and that leaving wouldn't erase the imprint of its presence. But I had no choice. I stepped toward the light, praying it would lead me out, my every nerve screaming that this building was far more than abandoned walls and shadows. It was a living entity, patient, calculating, and eternal. I climbed toward the faint glow, every step echoing through the empty chamber. The shadows followed, stretching and pulsing with me, whispering names, memories, and accusations. When I finally emerged onto the main floor, the asylum's exterior was bathed in moonlight, but the air was still thick with its presence. I ran out into the open night, lungs burning, snow crunching underfoot. But I felt the building in every breath, a weight pressing on my mind. Even now, years later, I feel it. The whispers creep into my dreams, the shadowed corners of my apartment mimic its walls, and faint echoes of the basement hum in the silence. I understand now that the Charlevoix Asylum doesn't just trap souls, it imprints itself, bending memory, reshaping reality, and marking anyone who dares enter. I survived physically, but a part of me will always remain inside, wandering its endless corridors. Some doors are never truly closed, and some places, like this asylum, never let go. Never let. My name is Mark Dufresne, and this happened when I was 28, spending the summer at my family's cabin on Lac Sanjon, Quebec. I had grown up near the lake, and its calm waters had always brought me peace. That summer, though, something changed. The lake became a mirror reflecting not just the sky, but something darker, something waiting beneath the surface. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, I noticed a shadow gliding across the water, not cast by the setting sun, but moving independently. It was shapeless, yet undeniably aware, drifting along the shoreline with deliberate, silent motion. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection warped by waves. But when I approached the dock, the shadow retreated smoothly, as if observing me. A cold chill ran down my spine. Something on Lac Saint-Jean didn't belong to this world, and it knew I was there. That night, I slept uneasily, hearing whispers from the water and sensing eyes upon me that belonged to neither human nor animal. The next morning, I woke to find the shoreline littered with unusual marks. Long, thin impressions in the sand, moving toward the forest and then disappearing abruptly. I followed them cautiously, but the deeper I went, the denser the trees became, and the sense of being watched intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me flinch, yet no animal appeared. The shadow had left a trail, not of footprints, but of something far more deliberate, marking territory I had no right to enter. As night fell again, I sat on the dock, staring into the black water. The shadow returned, gliding just beneath the surface, perfectly still yet impossibly aware. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was a trick of my eyes, that water could deceive even the most observant. But then it moved in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat, pausing when I inhaled, rippling when I blinked. It was aware of me in ways I could not comprehend, patient, watching, and waiting for the moment I let my guard down. That night, sleep abandoned me entirely. Every shadow in the cabin seemed alive, stretching toward me, whispering through the cracks in the walls. I kept hearing the faint splash of water outside, rhythmic, deliberate, like the lake itself was breathing in time with the shadow. Unable to bear it any longer, I grabbed a flashlight and went to the shoreline. The lake was perfectly still, moonlight reflecting off its black surface. But then I saw it, The shadow had risen partially from the water, an amorphous dark form that hovered just above the surface. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze pierce through me, studying me, learning me. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the dock, and the cold wind carried a low, guttural whisper I couldn't understand, yet it conveyed meaning. You see me. You're mine now. Panic surged as the shadow rippled toward me, water splashing violently, yet it never fully touched the dock. It moved with patience and intelligence that no natural creature could possess. I ran back to the cabin, heart pounding, the shadow gliding silently across the water behind me, its form ever changing like liquid smoke. Doors slammed shut as I entered, though no wind blew, and the whispers followed me inside, echoing off the walls, carrying an unintelligible language that felt like a warning. I tried to barricade the cabin, piling furniture against doors and windows, but the sense of being watched never left. The shadow didn't need to be inside. It was connected to me, to the dock, to the water, and it followed me everywhere. I realized then that the lake itself was an extension of the shadow, a vast, patient predator, capable of observing and manipulating everything in its domain. Every ripple in the water, every reflection, every shadow now belonged to it. That night, I understood the horrifying truth. The shadow wasn't just a creature. It was an intelligence, ancient, patient, and bound to the lake. It could wait years if necessary, and anyone daring to linger on Lac Sanjon risked becoming part of its dark will. By the next morning, I was exhausted but too terrified to leave the cabin. Every time I looked out at the lake, I saw faint ripples forming patterns that weren't natural, as if the shadow had moved beneath the water while I slept. I grabbed my camera, hoping to capture evidence. But the lens revealed nothing, only black reflections of the water and forest. It was like the shadow existed in a different layer of reality, visible only to the mind, not the eyes. I decided to walk along the shoreline, hoping distance would lessen its influence. But the marks in the sand returned, long, thin, almost clawed impressions leading from the dock toward the dense forest. With each step, a subtle unease pressed against me, a knowledge that I was being observed in ways I could not escape. Every splash, every whispering wind carried the presence of the shadow, as if it were alive in every part of the lake. By noon, I realized I wasn't just near Lac Sanjon. I had become part of it, watched constantly by an intelligence older than I could imagine. That evening, I decided to confront the shadow directly. I took a small boat onto the lake, flashlight in hand, heart hammering in my chest. The water was unnaturally still, every splash from the oars echoing loudly in the quiet night. Then I saw it, the shadow beneath me, coalescing into a shape that suggested a tall humanoid figure, yet constantly shifting, edges rippling like liquid smoke. Its presence pressed against me, heavy and intelligent, as though it were aware of my fear and feeding on it. The shadow moved in perfect synchronization with the boat, gliding effortlessly beneath, keeping pace without creating waves. I tried to row faster, but the water itself seemed to resist my movements. My flashlight caught faint hints of dark eyes, or what felt like eyes, staring up at me from beneath the surface. A cold, guttural whisper filled my mind. You cannot leave. You belong. I understood then that this was no ordinary creature. Lac Sanjon had its guardian, an ancient shadow that waited for anyone daring to wander too far. And I had awoken it fully. I rowed as fast as I could, but the water seemed to resist, slowing my movements despite the effort. The shadow remained beneath the boat, flowing like smoke, always just out of reach, always watching. My chest tightened with every heartbeat, and the whispers intensified, overlapping into a maddening chorus that filled my mind. I realized then that the shadow didn't just exist in the lake. It existed in my perception, in my fears, in every subtle vibration of the water. At one point, the shadow surged upward, creating a wave that nearly capsized me. I fell against the edge of the boat, gasping for air, and the shadow receded instantly, almost as if it were toying with me. I felt its intelligence, patient and calculating, aware of every instinct I had. The lake had always been serene, but I now understood the dark truth. Lac Sanjon harbored a presence older and more cunning than any human could comprehend. And I had awoken it, unprepared for the price of attention. Finally, I reached the far end of the lake, hoping distance would break the shadow's hold. But as I approached the shoreline, I noticed the water ahead was unnaturally calm, unnervingly still, reflecting not the stars, but dark shapes moving beneath, waiting. I realized then that escape was an illusion. The shadow was bound to the lake, and by proximity, it had attached itself to me. Even if I left Lac Sanjon physically, it would follow, patient and silent, waiting for the next moment of vulnerability. The whispers became words I could almost understand. You see me, and now you belong. My fear turned to desperation. I climbed out of the boat, drenched, shivering violently, and fled along the shoreline toward the forest. The shadow glided across the water behind me, never fast, never slow, but always present. That night, I slept fitfully, the lake reflecting only blackness. And I understood a terrifying truth. Some places harbor guardians, and some guardians are ancient, intelligent, and unyielding. Lac Sanjon had claimed me, at least partially, and it would not let go. Days later, even back at my home in town, the lake's presence lingered. Every reflection of water, every shadow at night, seemed alive, watching me, testing me. I noticed it first in the mirror. My own reflection seemed slightly distorted, darker around the edges. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw the shapeless form behind me. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was paranoia, but deep inside, I knew it was the shadow. Lac Sanjon had attached itself to me, embedding its awareness into my mind. Even the air around my apartment felt heavier, as if carrying the whispers I had heard on the lake. I could hear faint splashes at night, water dripping, though there was no source. The shadow was patient, didn't need to strike immediately. Its intelligence was terrifying. It could wait, observe, and grow stronger, knowing that fear would always make me remember. I understood then that my summer at the lake was over, but Lac Sanjon was not done with me. It had claimed a part of my mind, a part that would never truly be free. I tried to warn others, but no one believed me. Stories of strange occurrences at Lac Sanjon were dismissed as folklore, exaggeration, or imagination. Yet I knew the truth. The shadow was real, ancient, intelligent, and patient. It waited beneath the surface of the lake, observing, shaping reality, and claiming those who dared approach. Even now, years later, I avoid lakes at night, and every ripple in water reminds me of its presence. Sometimes, in dreams, I see the shadow gliding across black waters, patient and silent, always aware. It has taught me that some guardians of the natural world are not benevolent. Lac Sanjon's shadow does not act out of malice. It exists beyond morality, beyond human understanding. Its presence is a warning, a lesson that curiosity comes at a cost. I survived the lake physically, but a part of me remains tethered to the shadow, eternally aware of the water's dark depths. And I know that one day, if I return, it will still be waiting, patient, silent, and utterly inescapable. My name is Sophie Laroche, and this happened when I was 26, hiking alone in the remote estuary woods of Quebec. I had always loved solitude in nature, but these woods felt different, ancient, quiet, and watching. My plan was simple: a 2-day hike to disconnect from the city, capture some photographs, and enjoy the wilderness. Yet, from the moment I entered, the forest seemed to resist me. The trees were unnaturally tall, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, casting shadows that moved independently of the sun. On the first evening, I realized something was off. I had set up my camp near a small clearing, but when I returned from collecting firewood, the clearing seemed shifted, slightly smaller and unfamiliar. The trails I had marked vanished, replaced by paths that twisted unpredictably. The air carried whispers, soft, almost imperceptible at first, but persistent, calling my name. I felt eyes on me, though I could see no one. The forest itself seemed alive, aware of my presence and patient. That night, I lay awake, listening to the rustling leaves, knowing I was no longer merely visiting the estuary woods. I was being observed. By morning, panic had started to creep in. I tried retracing the trail I'd followed the previous day, but nothing looked familiar. The landmarks I had noted, the moss-covered rocks, the fallen log, had vanished or moved. The forest seemed to shift subtly around me, corridors of trees bending and twisting, subtly closing behind me and opening ahead. I began to hear footsteps, soft but deliberate, mirroring my own movements. I would stop, and the footsteps would stop. I would move, and they would resume. As the day wore on, the sunlight filtering through the branches became distorted, casting irregular patterns that disoriented me further. The whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't understand, yet they carried an unmistakable intent. Stay. Don't leave. We see you. Fear gnawed at me, yet I pressed forward, hoping to escape, only to realize the terrifying truth. The estuary woods weren't just dense. They were alive, reshaping themselves, feeding on my fear and intent on keeping me inside indefinitely. By midday, exhaustion set in, but turning back was no longer an option. I couldn't find my original path. Every tree, every rock, every slope seemed to have subtly shifted, as if the forest had rewritten itself overnight. The whispers grew louder, almost urgent now, echoing in my ears even when the wind was still. I began to see movement at the edge of my vision. Shadows darting between trees, never fully visible, but always tracking me. My heart pounded, and I realized that the estuary woods weren't just alive. They were aware, intelligent, and patient. I stumbled upon an old stone ruin, half buried in moss. It looked like a foundation of a building long forgotten. Yet I felt a heavy presence there, as if the place itself remembered people who had entered before me. A chill ran down my spine when the shadows coalesced briefly near the ruins, humanoid but blurred, watching silently. I wanted to flee, but some deep, instinctual part of me kept me rooted. The forest was playing a game, and I was its prey. Every step I took, every breath, every glance was catalogued, observed, and judged. I forced myself to move past the ruins, hoping distance would break the forest's hold. But the trails seemed endless, looping back on themselves in impossible ways. Every clearing I reached was subtly different than I remembered, and the air carried a low hum vibrating in my chest. Then I heard it, a whisper distinctly saying my name, followed by laughter that wasn't human. My breath quickened, and panic surged. The shadows now moved deliberately, forming shapes that suggested figures, tall, thin, faceless. But they would vanish whenever I looked directly at them. I tried climbing a hill to get a better view, but the forest's canopy warped strangely above me, blocking the horizon. The sense of being watched was suffocating, and I realized the Estrie Woods didn't just trap people physically. They trapped perception itself. I had no idea which direction led out, and every instinct screamed that leaving was impossible. With each step, the whispers grew clearer. Stay. We remember. You cannot leave. It was then that I understood the horrifying truth. This forest had claimed many before me, and it had already begun to claim me. As the afternoon wore on, hunger and fatigue threatened to overwhelm me, but I couldn't stop moving. Every step forward seemed to bend the forest around me, the trees leaning subtly, the paths twisting like serpents, forcing me deeper. I began marking trees with scratches from my pocket knife, hoping to retrace my steps later. But even those marks shifted, faintly warped, or disappeared entirely. The Estrie Woods were not just alive. They were rewriting reality, reshaping space and time around me. At one point, I came across a shallow stream. I knelt to drink, and for a brief moment, the water reflected something impossible. Dozens of faces, pale and terrified, staring at me from beneath the surface, mouths moving silently. I recoiled, heart hammering. The whispers escalated, overlapping, forming a cacophony of voices that echoed from the trees and undergrowth. I realized with a sickening clarity that the forest had seen every step I had taken, cataloged every fear, and now it was learning, adapting, and anticipating my moves. The Estrie Woods weren't just a trap. They were a predator, patient and eternal. Night fell quickly, swallowing the forest in darkness that was heavier than ordinary night. The trees merged into a black wall, their branches forming skeletal fingers that seemed to reach for me. I lit a small lantern, but its glow barely pierced the oppressive shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig was amplified, echoing like deliberate steps following me. I realized the whispers had grown more coherent, as if the forest itself were speaking, warning, testing, mocking. I stumbled into a clearing I had not seen before. In its center stood a massive, gnarled tree with roots that writhed like snakes. Shadows pooled around it, coalescing into figures I could barely comprehend. Tall, thin, faceless entities, hovering slightly above the ground. They watched me, patient, assessing. I understood then that I wasn't merely lost. I had entered the heart of the Estrie Woods, and this place had eyes, memory, and will. It was alive, and I was its intruder. Escape was no longer a matter of distance. It was a matter of survival against a forest that existed beyond natural law. I forced myself to move through the clearing, keeping my eyes fixed on the path ahead. The faceless figures did not follow in the usual sense. They simply drifted, hovering at the edges of my vision, observing, patient, their presence pressing into my mind. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself weighed me down. The whispers no longer came from any one direction. They were everywhere, inside my head, echoing my own thoughts, twisting them into fear. I stumbled upon a small stone circle, half buried in moss, and felt a wave of vertigo sweep over me. The air thickened, vibrating with low hums, and the shadows around the clearing coalesced into shapes that suggested humanoid forms, but constantly rippled and shifted, impossible to focus on fully. It was then I realized the truth. The Estrie Woods weren't just shifting the land. They were bending perception, controlling what I saw, heard, and felt. Every instinct I had was being tested, and I understood that the forest had infinite patience. It could wait for me to falter, to make a mistake, to surrender. Desperation overtook me as I pressed forward, guided only by instinct and fear. The forest's whispers became urgent, almost angry, echoing my own thoughts back to me, mocking me, twisting my sense of direction. Every trail looped impossibly, trees bending in unnatural ways to block my escape. I realized with terror that the Estray woods weren't merely hiding me. They were actively testing me, reshaping the forest around my perception to trap me indefinitely. I reached another clearing, smaller and darker than the last, where the shadows pooled like liquid ink. The faceless figures hovered silently, motionless yet impossibly aware, and the low hum of the forest intensified, vibrating through my chest. My lantern flickered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw dozens of eyes opening on the trees, observing, patient, calculating. Every fiber of my being screamed to run. Yet I knew the forest had already anticipated my escape. I was inside its heart now, and I understood fully. The Estray woods were alive, intelligent, and eternal, and I had become their prey. Mind, body, and soul. By dawn, exhaustion had almost broken me, but I kept moving, driven by a primal fear I could not ignore. The forest was alive in every sense. The whispers had become a constant hum inside my mind. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision, and the ground seemed to subtly shift beneath my feet. I realized that escape was no longer about finding a physical path. The Estray woods had embedded themselves into my perception. Every landmark, every trail had been rewritten. I stumbled upon a shallow pond I hadn't noticed before, the surface perfectly still and reflecting the skeletal branches above. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a familiar landmark, a rock I had used as a marker. But when I approached, it dissolved into darkness. The whispers intensified. "You belong. You cannot leave." Panic surged. I ran blindly, branches whipping against my face, the forest bending and twisting to slow me down. I understood then that the Estray woods were not just a forest. They were a living predator, and I was trapped inside their consciousness. A trespasser in an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. By mid-morning, I had no choice but to accept the terrifying truth. The Estray woods were patient, eternal, and I was now part of their domain. The trees seemed to whisper behind my back, the shadows moved with intent, and the forest itself bent reality around me. Every direction I chose led me deeper into the labyrinth. Every breath carried the hum of unseen eyes watching, judging, waiting. When I finally collapsed near another moss-covered clearing, I felt the forest's presence envelop me, pressing into my mind. The faceless figures hovered at the periphery of my vision, almost benevolent in their silent observation, yet utterly inescapable. I realized that some places are alive in ways humanity cannot comprehend, that intelligence can exist beyond reason, and that some forests are patient hunters that never tire. I survived physically, but a part of my consciousness remains tethered to the Estray woods, always aware of its presence, its whispers, and its patient watch. Escape is temporary, but their claim is eternal. My name is Etienne Moreau, and this happened when I was 24, exploring the area around Montmorency Falls in Quebec. I had grown up nearby and often hiked around the cliffs and trails, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced that summer. I was camping alone near the falls, hoping for a quiet weekend immersed in nature. The roar of the water usually comforted me, but that night it felt different, like it was hiding something beneath its constant motion. As darkness fell, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the cliff, barely visible through the mist rising from the falls. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but the figure didn't move naturally. It swayed slightly, almost floating, and its silhouette seemed distorted, too tall, too thin, unmoving even as I approached. My heart raced, and I felt a sudden chill that wasn't from the water. Something about Montmorency Falls had changed, and I realized I wasn't alone. The mist, the shadows, and the roaring water concealed something ancient and malevolent. That night, sleep was impossible, and the whispers of the falls haunted me even as I tried to ignore them. The next morning, I attempted to retrace my steps along the trail, hoping daylight would restore a sense of safety. But the woods near the falls felt alive, shadows moving unnaturally, leaves rustling in patterns that seemed deliberate. I noticed footprints near the cliff that hadn't been there the previous evening. Too long and narrow, impossible for a human to leave, yet clear in the soft dirt. My stomach churned as I realized the figure had followed me through the night. By midday, the mist thickened, rolling down the cliffs like a living entity. I heard whispers carried on the wind, soft but distinct, almost like someone calling my name. Every time I looked toward the falls, the figure appeared briefly, always at the edge, always watching. Its movements were unnervingly slow, deliberate and intelligent, as though it had been waiting for me. I began to understand that Montmorency Falls was not just a natural wonder. It was a place of presence, of observation, where the cliffs, water, and mist worked together to trap and terrorize those who lingered too long. By evening, fear had begun to take hold. I tried to stay near my campsite, but the figure's presence was undeniable. From the edge of the falls, I could see the mist swirling unnaturally, forming shapes that suggested movement, limbs, torsos, faces, but always indistinct. It was as if the water itself was alive, watching me, feeding on my fear. Every crash of the falls sounded like a whisper, echoing my name over and over. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the footprints, the figure, and the unnatural mist left no room for denial. Suddenly, a soft, guttural sound echoed through the cliffs, like the water had formed a voice. I froze, scanning the mist. And for a brief moment, I saw the figure closer, hovering above the rocks. Its shape rippled, shifting like smoke, tall and impossibly thin. Panic surged through me, and I realized that the falls themselves weren't just scenery. They were part of the entity's domain. The cliffs, water, and mist worked together to observe, manipulate, and terrify anyone who dared enter. And I had become their unwilling guest. I decided to descend closer to the base of the falls, hoping that proximity might allow me to understand what I was facing. The mist grew thicker as I approached, and the roar of the water was deafening. Yet amid the sound, I could hear the whispers again, soft, almost musical, calling my name, taunting me. Every rock I stepped on seemed to vibrate with unseen energy, and I felt eyes on my back, tracking my every movement. Then I noticed movement in the spray itself, shadows coalescing into forms that seemed human, but distorted, elongated, and faceless. They emerged briefly, then dissolved into mist before I could focus. The water licked the base of the cliff, yet the figures hovered above, almost floating. I realized with terror that the entity, or entities, did not need to touch me to terrify me. They existed in the environment, in the mist, in the roar of the water itself. Montmorency Falls had a consciousness, ancient and patient, and I had wandered directly into its awareness, completely exposed, completely observed, and utterly alone. As night fully descended, the falls became a wall of darkness and sound. and the mist thickened to a nearly solid curtain. I lit a small lantern, but its light barely penetrated the dense spray. The whispers had grown louder, more urgent, echoing inside my skull as if the water itself had become sentient. Every step I took along the wet rocks felt precarious, and every glance into the mist revealed fleeting shapes, tall and impossibly thin, dissolving before I could focus. I stumbled onto a narrow ledge along the cliffside, the water thundering beside me, and froze. In the mist, I glimpsed a figure standing atop a boulder, a humanoid shadow, faceless, hovering slightly above the ground, unnaturally tall. It tilted its head, as if studying me, its presence heavy and deliberate. I realized then that I had not stumbled into danger accidentally. Montmorency Falls itself was aware of me, patient, intelligent, and waiting. It observed my fear, learned from it, and tested every instinct I had. My body was exhausted, but my mind was fully aware that this was no ordinary haunting. I tried to descend toward the water, thinking proximity might reveal the truth. But every step felt like the forest itself resisted me. The shadows moved subtly, floating just at the edge of visibility, appearing and disappearing, with a rhythm that matched the roar of the falls. The whispers became coherent phrases in my mind. "You should not be here. You cannot leave. We see you." Fear pressed on me like a physical weight, and my hands trembled as I clutched the lantern. Suddenly, a figure emerged fully from the mist. Not a shadow this time, but a semi-transparent humanoid shape, taller than any human should be, with no features on its face. It hovered above the rocks, observing me silently, every movement deliberate. The mist around it twisted unnaturally, almost alive, curling around its form and then vanishing into the falls. I understood with a sickening clarity. Montmorency Falls itself, the water, the cliffs, and the mist, were one entity. An ancient intelligence that watched, tested, and consumed fear. I had become part of its domain, a trespasser in a consciousness older than time itself. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing on the slick rocks, my lantern swinging wildly, casting fractured light across the mist. The semi-transparent figure remained motionless, yet I could feel its awareness pressing into me. The whispers had grown into a low, guttural hum, vibrating through my chest and skull, intertwining with the roar of the waterfall. Every instinct screamed to run, but the terrain made flight almost impossible. Then I noticed the mist itself shifting, forming shapes that mirrored my movements, my hands, my legs, my terrified expression, but distorted, grotesque, and faceless. It was as though the falls were studying me, learning me, replicating me in their own twisted reflection. The realization was horrifying. This place didn't just haunt, it absorbed, it mirrored, it manipulated. The cliffs, the water, the mist, they were a single entity, intelligent, patient, and infinitely cruel. I felt my will being tested, every decision amplified by fear. Montmorency Falls had claimed my attention entirely, and I knew that every heartbeat, every thought, every tremor of panic was feeding whatever consciousness lingered in the roaring mist. Desperation overtook me, and I tried to backtrack along the cliffside. But the mist and shadows warped every familiar landmark. The whispers escalated into distinct phrases, repeating my name, mocking my panic, and promising that escape was impossible. I realized then that Montmorency Falls did not merely exist in space. It extended into perception itself, bending reality to trap those who lingered too long. The cliffs, the water, the mist, and the shadows were all part of an intelligence that existed beyond human comprehension. In one horrifying moment, I glimpsed multiple figures in the mist, each taller and thinner than a human, faceless, hovering in patterns that suggested observation and calculation. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They simply existed, eternal sentinels of the falls. Every instinct told me that the moment I looked away or faltered, I would be claimed. My lantern flickered violently, throwing jagged light across the mist, revealing glimpses of faces and forms that weren't human. I understood fully that Montmorency Falls was alive, aware, and patient, and that I had wandered directly into its domain, a trespasser whose mind and fear would be forever catalogued. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion and terror were nearly indistinguishable. I had no sense of direction. Every path I tried to follow led me back to the same mist-shrouded clearing. The semi-transparent figures drifted silently through the spray, never approaching, yet their presence was oppressive, like the weight of centuries pressing down on me. The whispers had become a constant, gnawing voice inside my skull. You cannot leave. You belong. We see you. I stumbled to the edge of the falls, gasping, the roar of the water deafening. And for a fleeting moment, I thought of jumping, of ending the nightmare. But instinct screamed that the falls themselves would consume me. Then, I glimpsed reflections in the swirling mist, countless faceless silhouettes mimicking my every movement, forming a ring around me that extended into the cliffs and spray. Montmorency Falls was not just haunted. It was sentient, a predator of perception. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat had been catalogued, feeding the consciousness that lingered within the mist, water, and cliffs. Escape was no longer a possibility. It had already claimed me in ways I could barely comprehend. As dawn broke, the mist thinned just enough to reveal the cliffs and rushing water clearly. But the figures did not vanish. They lingered, pale and faceless, observing silently. I realized that Montmorency Falls was not merely a place of natural beauty. It was a guardian of something ancient, patient, and terrifying, feeding on the fear and curiosity of those who approached. My mind was exhausted, yet hyper-aware, haunted by every sound, every shadow, every whisper. When I finally retreated to the forest trail far from the cliff, the sense of being watched did not leave me. The roar of the falls echoed in my ears for weeks, a reminder that my consciousness had brushed against something older than human memory, a presence that catalogued my fear and preserved it. I survived physically, but a part of my mind remained tethered to Montmorency Falls, always alert, always aware of its eternal watch. Some places are alive in ways humanity cannot comprehend, and Montmorency Falls had claimed me, mind, body, and soul, for as long as I live.